Maybe you want to start and introduce yourself.
I mean, there's not so many to say anymore. So, Sebastian, co-founder of Kubernetes, and as said, deeply involved in the whole Kubernetes ecosystem.
Yeah, indeed. Your name is across many pages by now. And yeah, I'm one of the Kubernetes maintainers, not the one. Like, I'm with the project for quite long. And yes, this session is about Kubernetes, but not only, mostly about Kubernetes, actually. So let's get started. This is a virtual machine, as Dolly is rendering it for us when you type it into the prompt. And we're starting with just recently, or well, I mean, we saw it coming up, right? Our industry, like when I speak about industry, it's like IT, right? Our IT world was shook up because one of the dominant provider to run virtual machines, like an infrastructure provider to run virtual machines, VMware, got bought, and that sent ripples through our industry, right? Because it's so dominant. I mean, it's a great product, right? Don't get me wrong, right? It's a nice product, and that is why they are so present with so many of our customers, or if you're a customer, maybe even in your organization. Seeing VMware being bought and doing some changes to their business model led many customers to rethink, what are we going to do, right? For technical reasons, for licensing reasons, for trust reasons, right? There are many reasons, and I don't want to focus on that part. I want to look at the problem that many customers and many people are in the situation today that they need to reconsider and look, what do we do about virtual machines not only today, but tomorrow, right? Like, so overnight, so black and white, and that's where the black and white comes from. So overnight, customers had to make a decision, or are forced to make a decision, where do we want to go? And depending on where you are with your, who of you is running virtual machines today? Oh, it's not everybody. It's like quite a good portion, but not everybody. So virtual machines are quite dominant in many use cases, right? Starting with Kubernetes, running Kubernetes like on-premise or in the cloud is often done in virtual machines. But not only, right? I mean, virtual machines started much earlier. So you have like Windows XP, all those funny things, right? NetBSD, FreeBSD, everything you can think of is almost run in virtual machines, which is making it tricky. So depending on where you are today and how many virtual machines you're running, you can rank yourself according to this British Columbia Fire Index, right? Either you're very relaxed to the left-hand side because there's nothing critical, you don't have special requirements, or because VMware does such a good job in providing features, right, across the board, let it be storage, network, high availability, resilience, you see yourself on the right-hand side, right, rank 6, where you say, I need to move away, but I've got all these special requirements, all this special hardware, all these special appliances, so what the heck am I going to do? Next slide. So in the end, you're facing a change. And the change is not only of a technical nature, right? You need to look at how can I actually take my hardware, right, and move it. I mean, by the way, all these changes and what you're facing or customers are facing depends on your needs, obviously, right? If you are like me 20 years ago, I really don't worry if I got my hardware certified to run Fedora or something like this, and if it runs libvirt or not, or KVM, I will just make it work. But on the other hand, there can be regulations and like national regulations or compliance requirements which require somebody to take care of all of these things, right? So that your hardware is certified, right? That you can show that you get a continuous stream of updates for your firmware, for your micro-segmentation networking cards, and so on and so forth. You need to look at my ISV certify their appliance on my new system. What about my partners, right? Where I'm sourcing storage from, where I'm sourcing network solutions from. Regulations and compliance point, we spoke about it. And then in the end, even if all of that is fine, where do I get the training resources? Where do I get support for the software? And in the end, it's, do I send my people through this change? Does it make sense? Or do I need to revisit this in 5 years from now, in 2 years from now? And my people have to go through all of these changes again, right? So that's something that this small change implies, right? It's not just a technical thing, it's everything that it entails. I think the answer is there's no easy way out, right? So if you decided, or if somebody decides to leave their current platform, and it doesn't have to be VMware, it can be anything, right? But VMware is like the point that got us started is there is no easy way out, right? Depending on where you are on that like enterprise grade, you really need to make a hard decision with consequences. There are some low-hanging fruits, and this is public domain, and I really like that drawing. So it's low-hanging fruits. So if you are the red dot, right, then there are some solutions that are, it's purple, right? That purple dot that's a little bit closer to the red one. There are solutions that are closer to your use case today, right? So you say 80% of what I need is provided by that vendor or that other vendor. And there are solutions that are further away, like that green-bluish dot, which is a little bit further away, because they don't necessarily provide already what you need. But the important point that I want to point out here is you're evaluating your requirements against the new solution against the requirements that you have today. And one part of that session today, before we go there, is, and all of this, by the way, all of the changes require obviously money and budget. But the point is to open up the view to don't only think about today, and that's where I give over to Sebastian.
Yeah, I mean, if you start evaluating a new solution, the first question you need to think about is like, what is the time horizon? Like, are you thinking in like just 1 or 2 years? I think, like, if you're looking back, how long an existing solution is already running, I think it's mostly 5, 10, or even longer time frame. So if you now make a decision, it's a decision for the next 10 years or even longer where you want to go for. So, and even potentially, as Fabian showed, there are solutions which are really close to what you need now. I think it's really important to think about, okay, where do we want to go in general? Because if you now need to do the change, there's a lot of things you need to then change. People, technology, is the short way the good way? And do you potentially need to change then in 5 years again? Or do you say, okay, potentially now I need to do a bigger change, but then I'm going to a platform where I know that's the future platform for at least 10 years, 15 years. And I mean, I think we have the same on Kubernetes. Like, I think on the container side, in most of the cases, to run containers nowadays, we use Kubernetes. And if you're looking into enterprises, now more and more critical workload is going onto Kubernetes, running container workload on a Kubernetes system. And this workload, it's clear it's not just for 1 or 2 years. They will stay there for quite some long time. So on the container side, there is already a long-term commitment to Kubernetes to use this and to run this. But the question is, what do we do on the virtualization side? I mean, one thing which comes up is KubeVirt, because with this, there's an option to run containerized workloads and virtualized workloads side by side on the same platform. But what we want to talk today is really also about, if you look into KubeVirt, KubeVirt is a control plane for your hypervisor. And if you're looking into the existing platforms, it's not only about the hypervisor. I mean, of course, running VMs is a critical piece, but you need to have a lot of more components which you need to run, which you need to operate. And there, you need to look into how to do this. If you're deciding going in the future, we're saying, okay, potentially, I really want to have one platform running my container workload and my virtualization workload on the same platform, which could have a lot of benefits, because then if you start training your team who's currently responsible for your VM workload to a new platform, they also are then directly capable to run your containerized workload. So both teams, well, the container teams and the VM teams can merge much more together. You can get much more synergies. You can also build then, or using much more the same tooling. You don't have so much different tooling for your virtualized environment versus your containerized environment. But as I said, KubeVirt can only be the starting point. So, if you ask Dali, what's a virtual machine, you're getting this. But on this picture, you already see it's not only 1 or 2 pieces there. A virtual machine or a real platform, not only a virtual machine, a real enterprise-grade platform needs much more capabilities to just run VMs. And the good thing is with Kubernetes and the extensibility of Kubernetes is there's a large ecosystem. I mean, why we are all here? It's because of cloud native. It's because of this whole large ecosystem. So For most of the questions or for most of the problems running virtualized workloads on a Kubernetes cluster, there is a solution out there. But the challenge is like, you really need to think about how to integrate this. What solutions do you need? And we will look into this later, but you need to find answers about how do you deal with storage? How do you deal with networking? What is with backup and recovery? All this kinds of question, how do you operate this whole new platform? And yes, as I said, for most of the tools, there are either open source solutions out there or commercial vendors who provide solutions out there. And now let's look into what do we need. So starting with the storage side. Kubernetes, and as I said, the good thing with Kubernetes is it's really good extensible, and in a lot of cases it has already defined interfaces. For example, for storage, the CSI interface. So with a container storage interface, you can plug in most of the storage solutions out there and use it for your containers. But the question is, what kind of capabilities or what kind of requirements do you have on virtual machines? Because what you really need to think about, if you start really like, if you're having hundreds or thousands or even 10,000 of VMs running, in best case, you can migrate them one-to-one. You don't want to refactor them completely. And on the virtualization side, because VMware is already out there so long and other solutions out also, and the platform grow over so much time, there are a lot of snowflakes there. So it's not like, hey, it's already clearly defined, starts already on the storage side. You potentially have different ways how the VMs are consuming storage, directly attached storage, over NFS, and of course, if you now go to a new solution, you need to think about what capabilities do I need and what VMs can I migrate to this, and potentially also what VMs I never will want to migrate because it's better to keep them on the existing platform, and then in a certain time we know we will decommission it, and I don't get all the problems or all the stuff what I have on the existing platform to my new platform. But you really need to think about, on the storage side, it's not just storage for the VMs. You need to think about what is my backup and restore tooling process. You need to think about how do I deal with disaster recovery. Is my storage capable to doing snapshots? If you're doing, for example, live migration for your VMs, and I mean, if you're running containers, or if you're using VMs for stateless machines which can restart quickly, it's not such a big deal. But for classical VM workload, you really need to have live migration. And so then you need to think about, can my storage deal with it? Can my network support this? And so you need a CSI plugin with dynamic provisioning. And I mean, the good thing is there are tools out there, community-based, for example, like OpenEBS or Rook, commercial, just to mention one, NetApp, Portworx, and others. So there are solutions out there, but you really need to think about what are the use cases, and is the storage provider you're using supporting your use case? Because not all of the solutions are supporting all the requirements, and then it gets hard if you later figure out, oh, I have the point I need to do, for example, live migration, just an example, and realizing it's not possible with my storage. The next big thing is about networking. I mean, here as well, as said, Kubernetes, quite extendable. We all use it already day by day. We have the container networking interface. This is how Cilium, Calico, or the cloud provider are plugging in their networking into Kubernetes. Like, this is how, in general, the cloud native networking works. But for VMs, you have potentially some different requirements. So you need much more classical networks. So potentially you want to separate your VMs or the networks where your VMs are running. You want to have, if a VM is restarting, keeping the IP, for example. I mean, for a pod, you don't care. It's restarted, it gets a new pod. Who cares? For VMs, you need this because potentially your application is built and is used to communicate over fixed IPs. And if your VM is restarting and gets a new IP, your service is broken and you need to manually fix this. And so there are other stuff as well. So how do you separate your networking? Do you do L2 networking like VLANs? Do you really need a software-defined networking? And it's a complete different way, well, it's different than you operate the networking for classical container networks. And there are also solutions out there. For example, there's Multis out there for multiple network interfaces. There are tools like KubeOVN or others who can support these use cases. And also the real cloud-native networks are getting more and more of these capabilities. Another use case is high availability. So, especially if you run, and that's I think the majority who's running a VM-based platform, run it in their own data center or on their own hardware, you need to think about the high availability, like what happens if a node goes down? Do you want to restart this manually? And how is your process today? And potentially, if you're now building a platform, can we improve on this? Like, can we automatically repair a node? Can we automatically install a new node? So with tools like Medicates or, for example, completely provision a node with for example, Tinkerbell to do pixie booting and completely ramping up a node from scratch. And if you're building a platform, I think one important part is also looking into what do you need today and where you want to go in 5 or 10 years, and what capabilities your platform should have to be more, for example, automated. And then, of course, you still need a cluster. It's running VMs, but under the hood, it's a Kubernetes cluster. So for the bare metal stuff, you need to have a cluster, and you need to think about what's my way to manage this cluster? How do you upgrade? How do I also test and validate all the components together? Because as we discussed, there are a lot of different components. You want to validate, you want to test to ensure if you upgrade the components, it's safe. In worst case, you can roll back, and you have tooling and automation around how you can manage all your cluster lifecycle. And with this,
thanks. So here we're going to look at the timeline. So how can we actually get there? Before we go there, I think something that we like while we were discussing the slides, we noted that we want to at least add one more thing or two. One is about the UI, right? Kubernetes by itself doesn't come with a UI, right? So that's something you need to care about as well. The other thing is how to actually get my workloads over from wherever I am today over to where I want to be. So we spoke about all the challenges, right? What you should take care of when you run Kubernetes in an enterprise way to meet your requirements, right? So how do you get there? All of us have their own paths, right? But one path that you could take in order to bring up an enterprise-ready Kubernetes on bare metal is first, you're in the best spot if you already run Kubernetes. Whenever we speak to people, the most successful people are those who have been using Kubernetes for a while and then extended, for example, to virtual machines because they know already everything about Kubernetes and they now just need to add this additional workload. It's really like this. Like at KubeCons, it's great to have people coming by after 2 years and saying, yeah, we now run it. It happened with the Linux Foundation, by the way, who's running now. They need to run certificate, like, you know, you can do an exam with the Linux Foundation, and those people just came by and they said, yeah, we tried it out, and you're like, yeah, it just worked, and now we're running it in production, so that's amazing. But there are different people who say, we were running this platform, that platform, and they struggle to understand Kubernetes, right? So that is what went into this timeline, right? So start to explore, and the font is really small, but it says understand your workloads and their special needs, right? So have an exploration phase to understand, is there anything that is lighting up, right? That makes your workloads very special. The next step is just get the basics started, right? Deploy Kubernetes cluster, deploy them in Metal, try all the different tools and vendors that have different tools to see what is fitting you and your environment best, right? But be a master at deploying Kubernetes. You want to bring it up and burn it down, right? And bring it up again so that you know it by heart, because that is, build a solid foundation like the Egyptians and then a layer of stuff on top of it. In step 3, you have a well-understood cluster, right? Nothing is running on it, right? You can authenticate because you've set up OpenID. And now do whatever you would do in production, right? Run it through maintenance, right? Run updates, see if it's breaking apart. Try to break it, right? What happens if I only update networking, if I only update my container runtime, if I only take down storage, right? How's my cluster behaving? So get to know your system. With existing virtualization management platforms, by the way, all people have done this already, right? I mean, we forget, now we're in such a pressure situation that we need to learn all of this at once. But if we think back, 15 years, 10 years, whenever we started to onboard to our existing virtualization platform, then we went through all these steps already, but more naturally, right? And with less pressure because we grew into it. So try to break your Kubernetes cluster, run it, maintain it, run it in pre-production with trusted peers of yours to run virtualization workloads on Kubernetes as well, and repeat this over and over again. And in the end, once you know the cluster, once you know how to operate it, scale it up, right? Break your organization into pieces, or your customers, your internal customers, external customers, into pieces, and have tiers, right? So graduate from here to there, extend it gradually so that you can enhance your own skills or your team's skills according to what the field is getting back to you. So let's wrap it up. We are 20 more minutes into the call, not into the call, but into the session, obviously. So let's wrap it up, and let's have some time for questions, so be prepared. Kubernetes and KubeVirt to get, Kubernetes is a platform for workloads, right? And we actually start with it because, as Sebastian said, where do you want to be in 10 years? Also think about yourself, the automation degree. What kind of applications do you want to run in future, right? I mean, we spoke about, there are so many workloads on Kubernetes itself. There are operators for databases, there are operators for storage solutions, there's serverless, there are containers. Containers build there's this whole ecosystem around containers of how we develop applications, right? These 12-factor applications for containers. They are a Kubernetes-based IDE. So where do you see your org evolving? Right, and I would not stop with, we just need to run these VMs. Open up, reconsider, and manage the pressure. Kubernetes and KubeVirt can run virtual machines. In previous sessions, we've seen that actually customers do it out there at scale. GeForce Now is one of the examples, right? That's run on this combination. But for 80%, right, it's a good idea to say, let's pick a distribution, right? When I speak of distribution, 10 years ago would have been a Linux distribution. Today it's like a Kubernetes distribution, right? We have them from many of the big names, right? We have SUSE, right? We have Kubernetes, right, providing Kubernetes distribution. We have SUSE with Harvester, and we've got OKD from the Red Hat side more, and there are more of them, right? So pick one of them. Why? Because they usually provide that basic set of components in an opinionated way. They give you a network solution, they give you a fencing solution, they give you a storage solution. So somebody already had an opinion, somebody is doing some sanity testing of these components tied together, so they take away some of that complexity, right? They usually also provide deployment tools, right? Opinionated deployment tools to make sure that these components that are intended to be together are deployed together and can be upgraded together. So this is taking away some pain if you just want to get started. And usually they provide a UI as well, and possibly a tool that helps you to migrate workloads over to Kubernetes and KubeVirt as an enterprise-ready platform for virtualization. That's it. Thank you very much.
Super. So we do have some time for questions. I always love a duo talk, and I'm kind of curious, how did the two of you meet and decide to do a talk together? What's your origin story?
The origins go back many years, right? I think it's 7 years or so.
When did you start KubeVirt?
7 years or 8 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we at Kubernetes, we like to do mostly everything with Kubernetes. And so we were looking into like, oh yeah, can't we do VMs with Kubernetes? And then we saw, okay, there's a real project there called KubeVirt. Potentially, there's some interest for us. And so that's where we come in contact.
Oh, that's super nice. So you go way back. Okay, very good. I mean, you said enterprise ready, but someone still asked the question if KubeVirt is truly production ready for real scenarios to replace VMware.
That's a wonderful question. I would reply no, right? For the general case, it's no because, and that's what we try to lay out. KubeVirt by itself can run VMs, but VMware has provided so much more, and they did a great job, or they do a great job, right? So look at all the automation tools that are provided around that core virtualization product by VMware, right? The automation tools, the monitoring tools, and that is how I would view KubeVirt and Kubernetes in that context, right? KubeVirt is for running VMs, but if you really want to compare like that Kubernetes ecosystem against VMware, then you need to look broader. So I would say KubeVirt by itself, no, because it's missing a ton of stuff, but it was never intended to be in KubeVirt. Automation, right? We rely, or we see that we work well with Tekton and Argo for automation, right? Or good old Jenkins. For observability, we see that we work nice with OpenTelemetry, that we feed into Prometheus. All this stuff, Loki, right, for metrics coming up now. So the KubeVirt strategy is not, to boil the ocean and be that one thing, but the strategy is rather to say, we do one thing and we do it well, and that is running VMs on top of Kubernetes and tying to that ecosystem grade. And that's why we ended up on that slide before the last, pick a distribution, because the distribution is giving you Kubernetes already, and KubeVirt on top, right? And then you have an environment in which you can place your virtual machines, and then you get closer to where VMware is, because VMware is also, you get support. There's a number you can call, and I don't want to say Ghostbusters, but it's such a wonderful segue. But then there's a number you can call, right? There's a community you can speak to, so that is closer to what VMware is. KubeVirt by itself, no.
Yeah, I think you need to, if you were to phrase the question a bit of different and saying, is a cloud native ecosystem there to run production workload and replace VMware? I think I would not clearly say yes to everything, because there are definitely a lot of different use cases out there which potentially are not supported, but it goes much more close to this. There are definitely a lot of use cases where this stack then can completely replace this. And I think that's the important part. It's not only about KubeVirt. KubeVirt is a control plane for KVM. It's like, if you're looking into the other solutions, they have the hypervisor, but typically there's something on top which brings a lot of more components with it. And that's not KubeVirt. KubeVirt is only the small hypervisor component. And all the other stuff comes out of the ecosystem where we have a lot of capabilities.
Okay, maybe for a little elevator pitch, how would you explain KubeVirt to someone that only knows containerized workloads?
That's funny.
I put you on the spot, Tyler. Okay.
That's funny. Well, go ahead.
I can start
They're workshopping it.
I can start it. You can try that afterwards. So, I think the fundamental thing, what you need to explain to this person is like, Kubernetes was originally built for running container workloads. But if you look into Kubernetes, and especially if you run on the master components of Kubernetes, it's just a control plane. If you're looking into a lot of different use cases in the IT, networking, storage, everywhere you have control planes. And Kubernetes can be a control plane for a lot of different use cases. You can, especially with the extension of CRDs, you can use it for a lot of different use cases. And so, if the people have this mindset, then it's also much more easier to understand, to say, hey, we're leveraging Kubernetes, but it's primarily about the control plane. But the workload, what Kubernetes is managing with KubeVirt, it's VM workloads. Yes, if you look into the details, it still uses pods and so on, but it's really VM workloads. But you can also use Kubernetes to manage networking. You can, if you look into cross-plane, you are managing external, for example, on AWS databases or EC2 instances. It has nothing to do with containers. And same is true for KubeVirt. Yes, there you run on the same infrastructure, but it's a different use case, and you're primarily leveraging the control plane.
Wonderful.
No notes. Oh, the notes.
Good.
One thing to add, and I think that's, we never mention it because it's confusing, but I think if that person is really into containers and containerized workloads, I would actually say Kubernetes is a cloud-native application, because it is, to run virtual machines, like to run a specialized workload. So it's comparable to a database operator. It's just like a virtualization operator. Yeah.
All right, thanks. Let's do one more because we're, just ahead of lunch, and maybe you can get to the queues a little earlier. I love you, audience. All right, so let's see. Any? Regarding web UI, do you have any recommendation for one supporting KubeVirt?
I mean, many distributions have their opinionated UI because every distribution, Kubernetes has theirs, and we actually have KubeVirt Manager, I think it is. That's an opinionated way. We've got OKD or OpenShift, which has a dedicated UI. We've got Harvester, which got a dedicated UI. So there's several UIs that you can look at, and actually that's connected to the next question, which is what are the best learning resources? Look at your distribution, right? Because KubeVirt is the runtime, but really for high-level flows, like how do you backup and restore, how do I create VM, it heavily differentiates between the different distributions of Kubernetes. 2
answers in one. All right, great. Let's do one more round of applause and we break for lunch.